I Hate the News is the weekly news bulletin from I Hate Politics podcast, a show about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. It's September 9th, 2025. The bells of Foundry United Methodist Church on 16th Street in Washington, D.C. tolled this weekend, joining widespread protests against Trump's takeover of the city. The city's mayor and attorney general have taken different approaches in response. In Maryland, the governor issues a housing executive order, and the State Department of Transportation issues its rolling 6-year capital budget plan. In Montgomery County, a viral ICE story in the county turns out not to be true. Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by the Political Science Program at UMBC Shady Grove, where you'll learn a strong foundation in public policy, pre-law, and international affairs for an impactful career in a number of essential areas. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
What's with you today? What's with today? Gotta tell her I love her by one.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning, precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Dear Daria, a Washington, D.C. power pop indie rock band. Mary Jo Mattea on vocals, guitar, and keys. Joshua Hunter on guitar. Eamon Donnelly on bass, and Dan ABH on drums. You can find their music at deardariaband.com.
Damn the man who saved the empire. Damn the man who saved the empire. Damn the man who saved the empire. Damn the man who saved the
Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser last week signed an executive order that potentially allows the federal takeover of her city to continue beyond the 30 days of unilateral federal action permissible under the city's charter. She's in a bind, of course, not wanting to anger a mercurial president, while her constituents in an overwhelmingly Democratic city are expecting her to fight back. The resistance in the city to Trump has come instead from D.C.'s elected Attorney General Brian Schwab, who filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration for violating the city's home rule. Marcus Batchelor was a member of the city's Board of Education, ran for city council, and now serves as the national political director for the progressive advocacy group People for the American Way.
The mayor said that she wants the National Guard out of D.C. She doesn't think it's necessary. But what she says she's doing now through her order is setting up a framework for the continued cooperation and coordination with federal agencies, ATF, FBI, that she says that the district has maintained with federal agencies for decades, that she's just trying to streamline a process that will continue. The Attorney General, to your point, I think has taken a more aggressive approach. The mayor's taken a lot of flack from a lot of different corners in the district for her approach.
The mayor did say that carjackings are down, that homicides are down as a consequence of what she calls the federal surge.
I'm not going to contend with the crime stats. Any mass occupation of a militarized force in any community will have some temporary impact on public safety, but I think it will also have an impact, and this is what we've seen in the District of Columbia, on the freedom of movement as well. And so when you have less people moving around, obviously you're going to have less crime. That is not a permanent solution to our crime problem in the District of Columbia or across America. The only way you really end crime is to provide opportunity to the people most impacted by it or most susceptible to perpetrating it. And the president's policies on all of those fronts are horrible.
Are you seeing a increase in crime as a consequence in and around DC, which is what, Trump has also said that he's going to quote unquote beautify 20 miles around, which really brings in Rockville and Fairfax.
In terms of displacement of crime, I don't know if there's any data to suggest that that's been happening in terms of a regional impact. But a couple weeks ago, I saw a statistic that said that in one day, over 140 people were arraigned in the DC Superior Court. Court had to be in session until close to 1 a.m. And these are mostly folks on nonviolent, low-level offenses. This type of mass incarceration will come to a city near you, right? Whether it's Rockville or Fairfax when he's talking about this 20-mile radius, or, cities like Baltimore, which he's already threatened, cities like Chicago or Oakland.
Meanwhile, U.S. Attorney Janine Pirro can't even get a grand jury indictment against a sandwich.
U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia seeking felony charges on a person who threw a Subway sandwich. You've got, National Guard troops walking around, sticks and bags, picking up trash. It's just like the most ridiculous exercise, but also a pretty dangerous overreach, because even though we're seeing some of the, again, more benign and idiotic manifestations of this surge, there are real people, caught up in this campaign.
Both Mayor Bowser and Attorney General Schwab are elected, and they have constituents and supporters, and they act presumably to win re-election.
And they both have primaries in June. Yeah.
So if you can break down where their different support bases are.
Brian Schwab came out of a pretty contentious primary election, his first go around. He ended up performing strongly, but I think has been able to expand his base sheerly through his work. I think he's proven himself to be a pretty progressive prosecutor in the sense that he has the authority over juvenile crime in the district and has invested a lot of his time in diversion programming, in violence interruption. One of the city's larger violence interruption programs is run out of the office of the Attorney General. In his prosecutions, he's also looked out a lot for working folks, right? Prosecuting things like wage theft, prosecuting landlords. And so his base has turned out to be, as he approaches his first re-election, a pretty solidly progressive base. The mayor, she got less than 50% of the Democratic primary vote 4 years ago and has enjoyed more of a support from wealthier communities. She still enjoys a good chunk of Black support in the city, but again, that skews based on income. She's gotten her fair share of votes east of the river, but I think pretty consistently underperforms there compared to, again, more affluent, less Black sections of the city.
But who's going to run against Bowser? You need a viable candidate. Between Schwab and Bowser, we seem to have scrambled racial politics, right?
Brian has done a very good job at serving the communities. I think that rightfully would have been most skeptical of him coming into office, right? Communities of color, immigrant communities, poor communities, and I think he's been their champion. The mayoral election will be interesting. Nobody knows who's going to run, even though the primaries now less than a year away. The mayor, I don't think, has even announced her intention, given kind of all that's been going on in the city. But if she runs, most people expect that Robert White, the at-large council member who challenged her 4 years ago, may seek to do that. I think that there are also progressive circles that watched kind of the impact of Mamdani's candidacy in New York City, and think maybe a challenger more further left. I know that there's some progressive circles thinking, really in trying to encourage Councilmember Janice Lewis George from Ward 4, the mayor's home base, to also seek the office. So we'll see. It's going to be interesting. But I think that what happens in this crisis, I think, will play a huge role in the primary next year.
Marcus Batchelor, thank you.
Thank you.
Maryland Governor Wes Moore issued a housing executive order last week. And to break it down, we have Casey Anderson, former Montgomery County Planning Board Chair, who now works for Rogers Consulting, a land use planning and design firm.
My favorite is that it establishes framework for housing targets. So the state will work with local governments to establish targets for how much housing needs to be produced in each county or major city in the state. And that can form the basis in the future for holding local governments accountable for making sure that they clear a path to delivering the housing that we need to serve employers, to give everybody a place to live, to improve affordability. So even though it's not going to put any shovels in the ground right away, I think it may be the most important thing about this order over the long term. And that general approach has proven successful over a period of years in California and a couple of other states. It also calls for the state housing department to identify public land that the state owns that would be suitable for transit-oriented development. It applies only to very specific locations. I mean, the state only owns so much property near transit. So we're talking about metro stations, MARC stations, that sort of thing. So useful, but limited in scope or potential. And it also establishes an award for delivering housing using those housing targets, which is more than just you get a gold star. The idea is that local governments that succeed in meeting their housing targets will get additional points for certain state grant programs. The order talks about money for projects from Department of Housing and Community Development, but it's pretty easy to see how that could be expanded to include other state funding programs. So the governor didn't say this. I've never heard this from the governor's staff, but I could anticipate that once people get used to that idea, you could see using a local government's willingness and ability to meet housing targets as a criteria you could use for allocating funding for transportation or other state aid. No one of them is a huge breakthrough, but collectively, I think they speak to the fact that the governor seems to be committed to housing and understands that's a problem that has to be addressed at the state level because local governments are not always delivering. And also on the merits, I think that it represents some of the best practices that are out there in trying to encourage local housing production.
There is some resistance to the governor and his housing approach in parts of the state. I'm thinking Baltimore County in particular right now, but other places as well. Do you think this kind of approach will overcome that, or does it need legislative support?
The governor is trying to do what's within his authority to do. And I don't anticipate the state legislature is going to try to get in the way, but certainly it would be great if this could clear the path to legislation that would put some muscle on some of these things. For example, if you could tie the housing targets by statute to specific, carrots and sticks. In California, housing targets are tied to a series of remedies, including, in the most extreme case, local governments that fail to plan for enough housing lose local land use authority. Real estate developers can build projects that are not permitted under local law because state law preempts them on the basis that they fail to meet their housing goals.
Right now, they're just simply targets and you name and shame.
Even in the short term, there's some benefit to establishing targets by establishing some objective measures and applying them. It allows everybody who has an interest in this to try to get a handle on what's the scope of the problem in each jurisdiction. Starting January 1 of 2026, when this order calls for the targets to be issued, that becomes a basis for framing the public discussion. And that can be just as important as regulations.
The executive order includes a provision for the housing department to identify state-owned land for development. And you did mention metro stations, MARC stations. Now, I've always wondered why metro stations, say, for example, in Rockville, don't have dense development around them.
In Montgomery County, generally speaking, the problem is not that there's insufficient zoning to allow housing near metro. That's not true in Baltimore County, for example. Like the notorious case is the Lutherville MARC station, which is right next to a big box. I think it's a Home Depot or something like that, with a huge surface parking lot in front of it. And Baltimore County's zoning code not only severely limits the amount of building that can occur at that location, but is extremely restrictive about the kinds of uses.
Does local zoning apply on state land and maybe even federal land?
Legally speaking, the government, whether it's local or state, is not constrained by local and state laws that it applies to private property owners. But in practice, many local governments will conform to their zoning laws, apply the zoning laws themselves. I'm not exactly sure whether the state would have to make a statutory change to override local zoning authority. It certainly would be within the state's power. But the governor's order, combined with some of the other legislative proposals, make it clear that the state government can and will develop public sites more intensively, or in some cases, sites that are owned by, say, WMATA.
Casey Anderson, thank you.
Thank you, Sunil.
The state of Maryland issued its 2026 capital budget proposal for transportation last week. Mark Corman, the chair of the Environment and Transportation Committee in the Maryland House of Delegates, has the highlights.
Yeah, so first of all, this is an annual process where September 1st or whatever the first business weekday is of September, they issue a draft consolidated transportation program, which is their capital budget. As you know, Sunil, the transportation revenue that comes in goes first for debt service for the bonds the Department of Transportation issues, then operating costs, right? Whatever the operating costs are to run the trains, or the operating costs related to roadway maintenance, keeping the MVA hours open, running the airport, running the port, and then whatever's left goes into capital. And as you also know, over the past couple of years, when this draft has come out, it's been extremely concerning. 2 years ago, I think you had me on, and what they put out was an out of balance consolidated transportation budget, one they couldn't actually afford. It was very aspirational and frankly fictitious. And of course, they had to come back and revise that to get to more of a reality. And then the General Assembly stepped in and helped a little bit by providing a little bit of additional funding to try to help with some of the costs. Last year's was concerning for a different reason. It had a significant amount of cuts. Many projects and programs that people had thought were moving along were either being delayed or removed from the transportation program. Once again, this time with the leadership of the governor, the General Assembly stepped in and provided about $500 million of additional revenue to help bolster that budget. And I think what you're seeing this year is sort of a promises made, promises kept type budget. This is more of a status quo. What we said we would do last year, we are doing this year type of proposal. And I think that's, to the good. That's positive. There's not a cut to I-81. Instead, I-81, which is a roadway safety project in Western Maryland, is moving forward. Similarly, the Maryland 15 project in Frederick that was facing cuts last year is moving forward. That's an important safety project for that community. In Montgomery County, Georgia Avenue, Montgomery Hills, which is a sort of reimagining of that section of Georgia Avenue leading to the Beltway. That's moving forward. And they had a big announcement this past week about that. So that's all, positive. And I think we should be happy to see that, it's hard to raise taxes and fees, but when we do it, it goes to fund things that, we all want to see and care about, which are these important transportation, infrastructure, and safety projects.
The Georgia Avenue Montgomery Hills project was the first I Hate Politics episode.
Oh, funny. Well, I guess you're going to have to end now because it's coming to fruition. So it's time to shut down the podcast.
It may be time. How do the marquee items fare? Key Bridge, WMATA, Baltimore Red Line. How are we doing on those?
Sure. So going backwards, there's about $60 million in this for development of the Baltimore Red Line. And I think it's actually a legitimate question about whether we should be spending that money right now on the Baltimore Red Line or whether we should dedicate it to other things within Baltimore, but whether we should be dedicating it to other things just because of the reality of the federal government right now. So I think, open question on that. And, probably not just for me to say. I think people in Baltimore need to kind of make the decision about what the best use of resources devoted towards Baltimore is. The Key Bridge, as you know, exists a little bit outside of the normal transportation budget because it is a Maryland Transportation Authority facility. That is our tollway facility. And of course, right now, knock on wood, given what's happened in Washington, it's supposed to be funded 100% by the federal government. So that's all, the Key Bridge is all moving along. And the working assumption right now is that 100% will be funded by the federal government. But I know there is thinking in the Department of Transportation about what happens if that changes and, what they would have to do in that situation in terms of financing, in terms of tolls, and whether it would require an infusion of normal transportation budget revenue into the Transportation Authority. But again, as of now, the law passed by Congress is that 100% of that is going to be paid for. When it comes to WMATA, we're, again, you use the word status quo. I actually mean that in a somewhat positive sense, but it's a status quo budget. A couple of years ago, Governor Moore really led the way region-wide to increase the operating subsidy for WMATA, and the rest of the region followed along, and this budget continues that. What this budget doesn't do for WMATA is address the sort of medium-term problem WMATA has of its declining capital financing. So in 2018, the region really stepped forward and put in an additional $500 million a year in capital for Metro. That's really important. It's been very useful. There are fewer track fires. There are fewer elevator and escalator outages. A lot of important work has been done. But the problem with the $500 million, it was a fixed number and it hasn't grown. And as you know, $500 million is a lot to you and I, but it is not worth the same in 2025 as it was in 2018. And so over time, WMATA's ability to invest is declining because the dollars are not worth as much as they used to be, and the dollars they have are devoted to the debt service on the bonds they issued off of that money. So that's a medium-term problem for WMATA. This budget doesn't do anything about it. This budget certainly would not build the Red Line, even though it has money in it for planning for the Red Line. This budget doesn't deal with what we're going to do with highway user revenue after next year, when that formula, and that's local share and county and municipal share of motor fuel vehicle taxes, when that formula resets and declines, and the amount of money going to our counties and cities declines, this budget doesn't, address how you're, going to deal with that if you're going to try to keep the status quo or even increase the amount of money. This budget doesn't have significant investment in, say, the Brunswick line, where we need to put a lot of money in if we want to make that more of a viable option to commute through Montgomery and Howard counties and Frederick County and points west. It certainly doesn't have anything to really pay for the American Legion Bridge. So there's a lot of sort of medium and long-term needs this budget doesn't deal with. But it does deal with a lot of short-term needs. And again, the things they said last year, we need this money to do, they are moving forward and doing. And I do want to give them some credit for that.
What about the Purple Line and the Southern Maryland Transit?
Right. So the Purple Line is continuing along. The only real change in this budget is because these rolling 6-year budgets always add a new year, it has another year of availability payments built into it. Because as you know, under the current schedule, again, I'm doing a lot of knocking on wood this segment, but knock on wood, the Purple Line is scheduled to open to what's called revenue service, which is, in normal people speak, paying customers riding it by the end of 2027. That means the construction investment will be done, but there is an ongoing, I think, almost $200 million a year payment given to the vendor because it's a public-private partnership. And so that's all, moving along, as planned. That money's built into the budget. The Southern Maryland Rapid Transit, I've actually asked some follow-up to the Department of Transportation about this because FY27, fiscal year 27, which is the main budget year of this document has projections beyond that, but it will also form the basis of the next transportation budget that we'll be working on during the 2026 legislative session. That is the last year of a funding mandate we set up for the Southern Maryland Rapid Transit to basically match federal dollars because there were some federal earmarks provided. It doesn't look like that money is in this budget, but I think the reason for that might be because we've already spent all the federal money. So I've asked for clarification on that to make sure we're meeting the requirements of the mandate, but it's possible they've drawn down all the federal money already. But so to be continued on that, I'm still seeking more information.
Do you feel that the plan is road heavy and transit light?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's road heavy and transit light. I would say a lot of the capital projects that we have ready to go are road based, and we have some longer term capital transit needs. Now, one thing this budget does propose for transit that is sort of less of an issue where you and I live, but I think is important statewide, is the MTA light rail vehicle modernization, which has been a long deferred project, deferred by governors of multiple parties for decades. And that, is really necessary if the light rail is going to continue to operate in Baltimore. And so there's a very large investment into that. There's a lot of federal money coming for that as well. But the federal money will pay for the vehicles, but not a lot of the infrastructure the vehicles need, like the signaling system. And so this budget does have a huge amount of money set aside for that in it as well.
Mark Corman, thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
The next segment is a look into how insidious misinformation can be, even at the local level. Last week, a Montgomery County resident with the social media name of Le Ra reported on a local Facebook group with 12,000 members called Six School Moms of Montgomery County that her nanny was riding County Bus number 40 when agents of the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, stopped and boarded the bus near Wears Mill and Randolph Roads and asked each passenger to show their ID. 15 were detained. The nanny was let go because she had a picture of her green card in her phone. Laura reported that ICE agents ran the card through their devices, found her to be legal, and let her go. Laura's post went viral with hundreds of people posting and reposting the information. Natalie Fanny Gonzalez is the county council member whose district covers the Wears Mill and Randolph Road intersection.
Once I heard that there was the possibility of ICE in one of the ride-on buses, especially in my district, I had to say I saw it on social media and I questioned it right away. What I first did, I contacted Dr. Stoddard, who handles public safety issues for the county executive. And I also contacted right away the director of transportation, Chris Conklin, since he's the one overseeing Ride On. And right away, they told me, we're going to investigate, but we haven't heard anything. Okay, so that's one thing. The second thing, people call me constantly. Just the fact that it did not get a single phone call in Spanish or any other language about this made me question, this is probably not true. So I waited until I received final confirmation from Dr. Stoddard and Director Conklin. They both investigated in different ways, one contacting the bus drivers to see if something like this had happened, and the other one contacting ICE directly to see if they did some type of operation in our county, and the answers were no. And I think this situation is a reminder for everyone. Let's be very careful about the things that we publish on social media. And I know that people are doing it with good intentions, right? We want to protect our neighbors. But sometimes having that feeling that I got to do something, I want to make sure everybody knows that something is happening without checking the facts could actually produce fear when we already live in a situation that has so much chaos from the national level to the local level. And I tell people, please call my office if you ever doubt. I get tons of phone calls from people. Mostly I hear people tell me, Natalie, I think ICE is on this corner and that corner. And when I check, it's actually the police department doing a DUI task force.
You're going to get more and more of this because unfortunately that is the environment. Is there any way that you can have some kind of hotline or some kind of rapid response that verifies these kinds of allegations and gets back to people? Because really, fear is not what you want.
So right now, I work closely with CASA, okay, the Latino nonprofit. So every time they hear something, they contact me. And when I hear something, I also let them know. So this is a perfect example for this situation. I heard from 3 people at the same time, one of them being CASA, and it was immediately to say, to double check that it was not really a nice raid. And I told them, because they do have a hotline for people to report these things. So I do work closely with them. I thought about maybe I should put something on social media saying, this is not happening. But then I hesitated, and maybe I was wrong, but it's because I get so many questions and people sharing different events, and they're false. I don't want to have my social media just telling people this is false, this is false, this is false. I'm trying to keep it clean. Unless I know something that is happening for sure, you'll see me posting. But all these different incidents that are actually false, I just don't, because there's so many. I'm getting so many at this point for anything.
Natalie Fanny Gonzalez, thank you. Good luck fighting the conspiracy theories.
Thank you. You're welcome.
The Montgomery County Department of Transportation, which runs the ride-on bus service, has denied that anything like that happened. County buses have cameras. Checking IDs for a bus full of passengers would have delayed the bus, which did not happen. And an operation that detained 15 people would surely have been recorded by other citizens using their phones. No video has surfaced as yet. But the social media poster, Lara, insists that her story is correct. The group's admin says Lara has been a dependable and stalwart member of the group. With media so fragmented, there are few, if any, authoritative voices. Pick your trusted source. I hope I Hate Politics is among them. Before you post, ask yourself if what you're posting is true. Verify once, twice, and 3 times. Crying wolf depletes energy you will need later.
Stella's a strange and special girl, oblivious in her own world, a ray of sunshine each new day. She likes to hang around the house, sleep through the whole day on the couch, doesn't do much and that's okay.
That's all for this episode. Be sure to check out our feature interview series that come out Friday mornings. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities at Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Dear Daria, a Washington, D.C. power pop indie rock band. Mary Jo Mattea on vocals, guitar, and keys. Joshua Hunter on guitar. Eamon Donnelly on bass. And Dan ABH on drums. You can find their music at deardariaband.com. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.